And there's a lovely passage about the difference between
Superstar,
having
you are.
knowledge and being knowledge.
What was that of?
Eric Fromm.
Okay.
There's a difference between having knowledge, like I possess knowledge,
Yeah.
and being in the knowledge in the way you absorb it and you put this in motion, and that kind of creates your action. So that's very much similar concept.
That's excellent. Thank you so much. Excellent. Perfect. Okay, we're going to start. I'll give out sheets today. Oh, wow. So do you who photocopies this? I think it's Rabbi Listerman. I must thank him more often. Okay. Do you want to pass around the sheets? There's only one piece of paper, I'm afraid. I hope that's going to be enough. I just couldn't help myself learn about... We spoke last week about the basis of rabbinic authority, where we commanded to do the Hanukkah lights. What I want to do today is I'd like to look at one particular halakha within Hanukkah that's a bit counterintuitive. Oh, yes. Oh, that's so nice of you. Thank you so much. Oh, that's very, very kind. Excellent. We'll start. I think you can probably press...
Surprising thing, we were reading this today.
Oh, yes?
Yes, exactly, because there was like a question, why actually in the world we have laws of Hanukkah in Masechet Shabbat? What does it mean, and how is this related one to another?
Yes. Because it's all about the lights. It's all in the context of Shabbos candles and then... Yeah, exactly. Okay, we can start if you want. John, is it recording already?
Yeah.
Oh, excellent, good. That's really amazing. Okay, here we go. So this is the real start of the shir. Okay, so what I'd like to do today is I'd like to, as you mentioned, Mayor, a minute ago, the laws of lighting Hanukkah lights appears in the second chapter of Masechet Shabbat. The second chapter of Masechet Shabbat is the laws of lighting Shabbat candles. And then we go from Shabbat candles to Hanukkah candles. But there's a very important difference between Shabbat candles and Hanukkah. I mean, there are many differences. We're going to look at one interesting difference between Shabbat candles versus Hanukkah candles. And we're going to look at why that difference exists. Okay, so let's start with the Gemara that discusses the two. It's Masechet Shabbat, Daf Kaf Aleph Amud Bet, and the Gemara says like this: Amrei Le, Amar Rav Zera, Amar Rav. Rabbi Zera taught in the name of Rav. Petilot u'shmanim shamru chachamim ein madlikin bahem b'Shabbat, madlikin bahem b'Chanukah. Those wicks and oils that the rabbis told us not to use on Shabbat, you are allowed to use those lights for Hanukkah. Ben b'chol, ben b'Shabbat. Whether you're lighting your Hanukkah candles during a weekday or you're lighting your Hanukkah candles on Shabbat. So let me explain what that statement means. There are various lights, various candles that aren't quite as clean lights as other ones. You know, sometimes when you burn oil, I don't know, it's very smoky. So the Shabbat lights are for looking at, for us to enjoy at the Shabbat meal. And because I want to enjoy my Shabbat lights, I want them to enhance my Shabbat. So I want the light of my Shabbat candles to be a beautiful flame for me to enjoy. Hanukkah lights, on the other hand, are not for me to enjoy. In fact, the opposite. We're not supposed to use Hanukkah candles for reading. You're not supposed to use the light of the Hanukkah candles. You're just supposed to just light the Hanukkah candles. And therefore, even if the light of the Hanukkah candle it's not a beautiful flame, it's still perfectly acceptable for Hanukkah lights. You follow? What you see from here, I think, is that the Hanukkah lights are for outside and Shabbat lights are for inside. Shabbat is about lighting up my home, and Hanukkah is about lighting up the world. I mean, I don't know if we can say it as dramatically as that, but very roughly, that's sort of the idea. I light Hanukkah candles for me, for Shabbat candles are for me to see inside my house. I light my Hanukkah candles for you to see outside of my house. You follow? Okay, now look at the ramifications of what we just said, and this is what we're going to look at in detail. Omer Rabbi Yirmiyah taught, my time to Rav. Why does Rav say you can use whatever you like? And we mean you can use any type of light to light your Hanukkah candles. And listen to what he says. Very, very interesting. Kasavar, he believes, kavta, if the light of your Hanukkah candles goes out, ein zakuk la. Do you know what that means? If the light goes out, you don't need it. You don't need to relight your Hanukkah candles. Your mitzvah is to light the Hanukkah candles. You have to do everything you can to ensure that your Hanukkah candles will stay lit. But if they go out, don't worry. Kafta in zakuk la, v'asur lishtamesh bo'ora, and you're not allowed to use that light. This is a very, very interesting halakha, because I might have thought that the whole point of the Hanukkah lights is for everybody to see the Hanukkah lights. So if the light went out, I might have thought it's important to relight it. Now, just in brackets, you can relight it. I mean, and it's a nice thing to do. And if yours goes out, you should relight it. I know our children light oil Chanukiot, and sometimes it lights well, and sometimes it doesn't light well, and they often spend a long time fiddling around after they lit to make sure it stays lit. But that's just to do a hidur mitzvah, to beautify the mitzvah. But if you're in a rush, I light my Hanukkah candles in a way that I expect them to stay lit, and with that I've fulfilled my obligation in total. I have no further requirement to do anything with my Hanukkah lights. A very unusual law. Kafta ein zakuk la. Now, we'll see that this idea that we see in the Gemara is quoted by the Rambam, and it also makes it to the Shulchan Aruch. So have a look at the Rambam. The Rambam in Hilchot Megina v'Chanukah writes like this: Hidlika v'kavta. If you lit your Hanukkah lights and then they went out, ein zakuk lahadlika pam acheret. There's no need to relight the lights. You follow? Exactly based on the Gemara. Now I just want to mention one little point in brackets, not about our particular law, but I think this is a good place to understand how important the Rambam is. Just before we started, Meir mentioned how all the laws of Hanukkah appear in the second perek of Masechet Shabbat. Now, not everybody is a Talmid Chacham, and because not everyone is a Talmid Chacham, not everybody would necessarily know that if I want to learn the laws of Hanukkah, you need to go to Masechet Shabbat. And because of that, because not every halacha appears in its obvious place, there is no Masechet Chanukah. There is no tractate that talks about the laws of Hanukkah. It's just a couple of dapim in Shabbat. That's part of what motivated the Rambam to write Mishneh Torah. He realized there were people that want to learn halacha, and let's say it's coming up for Hanukkah now. So I remember lighting Hanukkah candles last year, but I don't remember exactly how to do it. So these days, right before Hanukkah, I want to brush up on the laws of Hanukkah, but I can't remember where it is. So I open up my Talmud, and I like look here, look there, and I can't find it anywhere. So Rambam says, in order to make halacha accessible, we have to reorganize halacha. And there'll be a book which is the laws of Hanukkah. We'll have a book that's the laws of Sukkah. We'll have a book that's the laws of Shabbat. You know, the laws of Kiddush and Havdalah appear in Masechet Pesachim, not in Masechet Shabbat. So I would want to learn the laws of Shabbat. I'd need to know to look in. So it's just a balagan for us who want to learn halakha. You'd be running around Shas, and you'd need to know Shas in order to look up halakha. So this poor guy that just wants to spend a bit of time to brush up on his halakha before the Chag would need to be an expert in Talmud to know where to find all the sugyas that talk about each halachic topic. And that's why the Rambam, the revolution of the Rambam, and the Torah did the same thing, is to take halakha out of the context of the Gemara, because when you take halakha out of the context of Gemara and then reorganize it in a more intuitive manner, as you know, the Gemara reflects it was sort of an oral tradition, a sort of like debate, where topic A led into topic B. Sort of they were talking about stuff, and that's how halakha is recorded. So notice how the first source that said kavta in zakuk la is in Masechet Shabbat, but then the Rambam, when you want to look it up, is in Hilchot Megillah v'Chanukah. He's now, and then I want to learn the laws of Hanukkah. I don't need to look in Shabbat. I'll go to the Rambam, Hilchot Hanukkah, take out the book, and then I can learn it and I'll be sorted. Yes?
I just recall that in Bava Kama we have sugya about camel, loaded shtan, and setting on fire a whole city. Who's responsible?
Yes.
And if I'm not mistaken, Rabbi Yehuda says if that was for Persume Nisa for Hanukkah, then he's pater.
Right.
Yeah. So that's because we don't have mentioned as you said, we don't have Masechet Hanukkah.
Correct.
And they're spread here and there, and one of them is in Bava Kama.
Yeah. So the Bava Kama is very interesting because that's a Mishnah, as opposed to the Gemara. I'm not an expert, but I think that's the only mention of Hanukkah in the Mishnah. Is not mentioned as a halakha. It's not the Hilchot Hanukkah. It's sort of within the laws of Bava Kama. It happens to mention that if someone has a Chanukiah in a Rashut Harabim and then it gets knocked over and causes a fire and something like that, but it's within the context of the laws of damages rather than the context of the laws of Hanukkah. So it mentions Hanukkah as a factor in the laws of damages, but it doesn't mention the laws of Hanukkah. The laws of Hanukkah, you go to Masechet Shabbat. That's Amoraim as opposed to the Tanaim. Although they're Brightot as well, which were from the time of the Mishnah. Okay, is that clear to everybody? We've got the Gemara, and then from the Gemara we go to the Rambam. Then we normally to go from the Rambam to the Shulchan Aruch. Look what the Shulchan Aruch says. He says something very interesting. Hadlaka oseh mitzvah. The lighting is what the mitzvah is to light. Lefichach im kabta kodem she'avar zamana ein zakuk la. There's no need to relight it. If you lit it and it's all good to go, no need to relight it. Afilu kavta be'erev Shabbat kodem kabbalat Shabbat shatayin nihi umibod yom eino zakuk la. So even goes into details. Even if I lit my Hanukkah candles before I lit the Shabbat candles, so I haven't brought in Shabbat yet, and then the Hanukkah candles go out, I still have no requirement to relight my Hanukkah candles. I want to reiterate that many people enjoy relighting their Hanukkah candles, and I strongly encourage you that if you light your Hanukkah candles and they go out, do relight them. It's a very enjoyable thing too, and it's nice for your Hanukkah to be fully lit. But know that you're not doing it because it's halachically required. You're doing it because that's what I want my Hanukkah to look full on Hanukkah. Yeah, exactly. Is that clear to everybody? Joy, happiness? Okay.
But there's a time that has to last, how much I have to light.
Yes, you're quite right. So let's say, what happens? Let's say I light my Hanukkah. According to Halacha, it needs to be lit for half an hour after Tzeta Kochavim. Okay? Now, so I light with enough oil to make sure that it will stay lit for at least half an hour after Tzeta Kochavim. Right? Now, if let's say I light it and then the wick is a rubbish wick or something goes wrong and it blows out, this is not intentional, but it blows out my Hanukkah lights, I would have no requirement to relight the Hanukkah lights after it blew out. But that you couldn't light on Hanukkah like a match and say, oh look, it's gone out after a minute, because there's no way that it could, it's not built to last for half an hour. But assuming that I set up my Chanukiah with enough oil or wax, whatever it is that I'm burning, assuming that I set it up with enough oil or wax to last for at least half an hour after night, and then for some reason it goes out within half an hour, meaning some reason out of my control, then I don't have any obligation to relight it. Now, just to explain, I would not be allowed, it's winter nights here in Jerusalem. I would not be allowed to light a Hanukkah outdoors, without some sort of covering to protect it from the wind. And say, well, I lit it. It wasn't my fault because I didn't really set it up to light. But assuming that I took all precautions and I set up my Hanukkah with all the perfect conditions for my Hanukkah to remain lit for at least half an hour after dark, but then for some unforeseen reason it blows out, then don't worry. That's what we're talking about. Is that clear? Joy? Okay. Excellent. So I want to understand why this is the din. Why do we say kavta ein zakuk la? And in order to understand that, we're going to look at two interpretations. We're going to look at both from Poland. We're going to look at the first interpretation from the Shem Shmuel, is Rav Shmuel Bornstein from Sokochov, which is a small town near Kotsk, apparently. And I know every time I say it incorrectly. I apologize to our Polish speakers here for getting it wrong, but that's who he is. And then after that, we're going to look at a chap called the Bnei Sascha. Bnei Sascha,
Dino.
huh?
Dino.
Is that his name?
It's the name of the place, Dino, and Bnei Sascha were based in Dino. It's still there till this time, and I've been there.
Really, that's amazing.
It's an amazing place.
So this chap, the Bnei Sascha, his name actually was Rav Yaakov Yisrael, but his rabbi told him that he is a descendant from the tribe of Yisachar. And therefore, in reference to his teacher, his rabbi, he called his book Bnei Sascha, recognizing this insight that his teacher told him about himself. Okay, so we're going to look at those two interpretations, but I want to start with the Shem Shmuel, Rav Shmuel Bornstein, Misokachov. He says like this. He taught this in Hanukkah, Tov Reish Ayin Zayin. Tov Reish Ayin Zayin is, in English, it's 1917. Who just did that? Who did that maths? Did you just do? You did that. Very good. 1917. Very good. You're very, very quick. 1917 in Sokochov in Poland. This is what he said. Yesh lehit bonen. We need to contemplate. Bahar dehilchata kavta in zakukla. Why is it that if your Hanukkah lights go out, you don't need to relight them? Ma shelo matzinu dugmata b'chol mitzvot shebetorah. We don't see that anywhere else. You didn't say in any other mitzvah you did your best. Meaning we're very interested in the result in halacha, not just in the sort of you did your best but it didn't quite work out. I don't know. In other contexts, we tend to say that you need to complete the mitzvah rather than you lit it and then it blew out. Then normally you would need to. The whole point is to have your Hanukkah lights. If it went out, I would have assumed I'd be obliged to relight them. V'nira, it appears to me. Tehine yadua, everybody knows. Tahayivanim hayu mitnagdim biyoter lemitzvot ma'asiyot. The Greeks were very opposed to mitzvot, to doing things. What I mean to say is they worship the mind over action, meaning that the greatest human being is measured not by what they do, but the greatest mind is the greatest person. Meaning that the ideal human being is somebody who separates himself as a result of what they think rather than as a result of what they do. They denied that God wants us to do particular things. Va'amru, and they said, Shekol shleimut ha'adan hemidut hamus umuskalot. He said, the ideal person, the greatest human being, is the intellect. Uvezehu mitdabek lesechel hapoel shimsio bedimyonam kiadu me'en hafilosofim shehem chochmei Yavan. Okay, I put over here at the bottom, you could summarize it that in the Greek ideal, the highest level of human accomplishment is the thought, meaning the greatest human being is a philosopher. Then you go from thought, the next level down is speech, and the lowest level of human achievement is action. So the greatest person will excel not in action or in speech, but the greatest human being will excel themselves with thought. You follow? I just want to remind you, of course, but I'm sure you know this already, just historically, when we say the Greeks, I'm not an expert in history, but I think it's something like this. There was a great leader in the ancient world called Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great lived at the time of the Mishnah, and he, but conquered a lot of the known world. And when he died, when Alexander the Great died, his empire was divided up into 4 kingdoms. One of the kingdoms were the Syrian Greeks that are north of Israel. Another one was the Ptolemy, who was in Egypt and south of Israel. And Israel was sort of in between these two second generation Greek empires. When we speak about the Greeks in the time of Hanukkah, we're not speaking about Alexander the Great. We're talking about the next generation, which are the Syrian Greeks. It's interesting actually, because Hanukkah was all about the Syrian Greeks, and it's interesting because this year in particular, Syria seems to be, it was a hot spot then, and it seems to be a little bit of a hot spot right now. Okay, so the Greeks, these Syrian, when we say the Gemara calls them the Greeks, but he's talking about the Syrian Greeks north of Israel. Okay. Va'alkein lu'umat nes hanerot tiknu mitzvot nerot Chanukah she'i mitzvah ba'asiyah levad. He says, we Jews wanted to affirm our commitment to actions. And therefore, the way that we eternalize Hanukkah is not by thinking, but I internalize our distinction between us and the Greeks. The way that we do that is not through thought, but rather through action. And that's why we commemorate Hanukkah by doing something. And what do? We light the Hanukkah candles. You follow? Do you see where we're going here? Ki, ba'adam, in a person, yesh machshava, dibur u'ma'aseh. A person has thought, speech, and action. ונבחר המעשה שהוא החלק הפחות שבאדם. And I might have thought that the action is the lowest level of humanity. Why? שבמעשה הוא משתתף עם יתר בעלי החיים. ומותר אדם מן הבהמה, מפני שהוא מדבר ויש לו שכל. ואתה מפני שהוא זכר לנס שהוא במעשה. והפך מחשבת היוונים. He said, I might have thought that action, what we do, is the lowest level of human activity. Why? Because in our actions, we are most similar to other living beings. We walk, a dog can walk. We run, a cheetah can run. We eat, cats and dogs eat. Our actions do not distinguish us from the animal kingdom. And therefore the Greeks said that our actions are of no significance, because with our actions we are parallel to the animal kingdom. What distinguishes a human being from the rest of the world is the fact that we communicate, we speak to each other, and perhaps even greater than that, we can think, that we're capable of thought. But thought is more than, like we can contemplate. Somebody once explained to me like this, that a dog, if you were to break an animal's leg, so that would hurt the animal, right? They would experience pain. But if I told the animal, I'm going to break your leg tomorrow, they'll sleep fine tonight. But if I break a person's leg, that will hurt them, right? But if I tell them tomorrow I'm going to break your leg, then they won't sleep tonight. That's thought. That's a level of understanding that animals are incapable of. And for that reason, the Greeks believed that the greatest human level is thought. And therefore, the focus of human excellence for the Greeks was all about thought. Because speech, animals communicate with one another, speech and actions are things that animals do. And therefore, I don't distinguish myself from animals through either of those things. Is that clear? But we Jews, explains the Shemesh Shmuel, are very different. We look at the world differently. And I'll give you an example. This is an example that you might be aware of from a book called the Sefer HaChinuch. The Sefer HaChinuch goes through all of the mitzvot in the Torah and explains the rationale for each mitzvah. I think it's mitzvah number 15. Mitzvah number 15 is that when you eat the Korban Pesach, you're not allowed to break any of the bones of the animal. Do you know about that? Now, why are you not allowed to break any of the bones of the animal? And the Sefer HaChinuch explains that if you're told that when you eat the Korban Pesach, you're not allowed to break any of the bones, it means that when you eat it, you'll eat that animal in a dignified manner. It won't be like a chaos, because you have to be. It's very fragile when you're cutting meat off this roasted lamb. You'll do it with great care because you know that you're not allowed to break the bones of the animal, and that will ensure that we eat in a dignified manner. And the Sefer HaChinuch uses in describing this mitzvah a very important phrase that really summarizes very beautifully the difference between this Syrian Greek approach to life and the Jewish approach. It says like this: Acharei pu'ulot nimshachim halevavot. And that is, our actions influence our hearts. So God wants us to be dignified. The purpose of a mitzvah is to refine our thoughts. Our commandments, our performance of mitzvot are the most important things that we do. For the Greeks, they eat and we eat. We are animals, they're animals. With eating, we're the same as them. The only thing that we are different on is our thoughts. According to the Jews, it's the opposite. Our eating has nothing to do with their eating. When I eat on Leil Shabbat, and you make kiddush and you make hamotzi. The table is like a mizbeach. This isn't a meal. I mean, this is a mikadesh Shabbat in that meal. So I'm doing an action, but I'm elevating a physical action into avodat Hashem. You follow? That view of actions is it's the opposite of the Greek way of looking at the world. You follow? We say that the greatest level of human involvement in the world is the way that we do our actions. We elevate the world through our actions. Our actions are what make us into Bnei Adam, what makes us into Bnei Torah, what makes us into Jews, what makes us into dignified people. You follow? Does that make sense to you? That's the point of conflict. Is that clear to everybody? Now, with that, he comes to explain. 1 second. Umishum hachi. Do you see where we are? We're in the middle of the second paragraph. The middle of the line, in the middle of the second paragraph. Umishum hachi. And because of this difference between the Syrian Greek view of thought as the highest level of human activity, and for us Jews, action being the highest level of human activity, because of that clash, therefore, Kavta ein zakuk la. If my Chanukiah goes out, I'm not required to relight it. Why? Tama shetolek v'holech achar kach hu mimela, ela sheba mikoach ma'asav. T'meikar uvoto sha'a na'asa hakol. Mikol makom achar kach chashuv mimela. He said, the most important thing on Hanukkah is the action. You follow? And to emphasize that the most important thing on Hanukkah is the action. Therefore, if I lit my Chanukiah and I did all the precautions that I'm supposed to take, if I lit the Chanukiah and then subsequently it goes out, that doesn't matter, because the focus on Hanukkah is just about doing the right thing. You follow? Whether it stays lit or not afterwards, that's really in God's hands. But it's to emphasize the focus for us Jews. The focus is on what we do, because what I do influences how I come to think. The highest level to distinguish a human being from an animal is not in the way I think, but it's in the way I act. You follow? Do you see? It's diametrically opposed to their way of looking at it. Okay. Hadlaka levad oseh mitzvah, and that's why all you need is to light. Shelo tiknu ela ha'maaseh b'foal. All you need to do is the action. Hipuch machshevet ha'yevanim, which is diametrically opposed to them. They say, I don't care about the action. You know, anyone can cause a fire. I'm interested in thought. כל עניין הדלקה עושה מצווה הוא משום שלא תקנו אלא על מעשה בפועל. What makes Hanukkah is what you do. להורות על עניינה שהוא הופך מחשבת היוונים, ומשום הכי הייתה גופה כבתה אין זקוק לה. This is a unique mitzvah that is true only on Hanukkah, in order to emphasize the distinction between the Greeks and the Jews, that the focus of our lives is what we do rather than what we think. Is that clear to everybody? Comments? Thoughts? Oh, you have to say something. Oh, yes? We're going to add something?
Helpful.
Huh?
Very enlightened.
It makes sense.
Right.
It's a very, very important idea. I really think it does distinguish us from other people. In psychology, there's a concept of, what's it called? Where you train somebody through, you do something, you do something in order to trigger your mind.
Conditioning? Conditioning?
Yeah, it's conditioning, but it's called something. Cognitive behavioral therapy.
Yes.
Cognitive behavioral therapy is based on this idea from the Sefer HaChinuch, and that is acharei pa'ulot nimshachim halevavot, that after our actions come our thoughts. I think it's a very, very, very important idea. I'll just mention in brackets, talking about actions and thoughts. A few days ago, I work, as you might know, in the area, in the local council here, and every day they have a canteen. There's a canteen in the area, and you queue up. Everyone queues up. You queue up to get your lunch. So I was when I was queuing up for lunch, and I happened to be queuing up next to someone who is a Talmid Chacham, and he's originally from America. And this person studied many years ago in YU. And he told me an amazing story about Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Soloveitchik, who was a Rosh Yeshiva in YU. He passed away maybe about 30 years ago, wrote some very, very important books in Jewish philosophy. And he would always, when it came up to lunch, he wouldn't jump the queue. He would always wait in line with all the students in order to get his lunch with the boys. And when he would get his meal, sometimes when people are starving, they sort of like they stuff themselves when they're hungry. He was an incredibly refined person in eating, and the boys would say that they would learn as much from I mean, I imagine not quite as much, but it was a lesson in being a Ben Torah, watching Rav Soloveitchik, not just how he would behave in the classroom teaching the students, but also the way that he behaved in the Chadar Ochel, waiting in line with all the other boys and patiently taking his food. I think this is a very, very important idea, that a Talmid Chacham is very much the way we behave, not just the greatest mind would become the greatest Jew, but it's very much that we distinguish ourselves from animals, not just in our ability to think, but on the contrary, the way that I act is in stark contrast to the way that an animal would act. And that's really what distinguishes me from an animal, as opposed to the Greeks who will say, well, they're eating, we're eating, there's no difference between a dog having its lunch and me having my lunch. What distinguishes me is my mind. But we say, on the contrary, my meal is, I make a bracha beforehand, I'm mekadesh, sometimes we have a su'udat mitzvah. On the contrary, it's our actions that distinguish us from the animal kingdom, and that's why kafta in zakukla, because we want to emphasize that the most important aspect of Hanukkah is what you do, because it's your actions that decide what sort of person you are. And then you can have the greatest mind in the world, and that's very useful, but the greatest Jew is the person who acts as a good person, rather than the greatest mind in the world. Is that clear to everybody? Okay, that's number one. That's a Shem Shmuel. Joy, happiness, comments.
You don't realize how useful this has been to me. I think a month ago I woke up with Divrei Torah of Hanukkah, and I spoke something about it. I was really happy about it, and then I forgot a lot of it, and this reminded me.
Oh, good. Oh, Baruch Hashem. So I hope, Bezrat Hashem, you'll be all ready for Hanukkah. It's a week tonight. Oh, no, a week tomorrow night. A week tomorrow night, Bezrat Hashem. Okay, let's turn now to Bnei Soscha. The Shem Shmuel, as that we just learned, he writes on Parashat Shavua. Bnei Soscha didn't write on Parashat Shavua. He wrote 12 chapters, each one on a different month. So as you see, it's Ma'amarei Chodesh Kislev. He says, Kafta ein zakuk la leramez, sheken hu malat esek haTorah, afilu lo kiven et halacha laha'ir, she'elchu rabim laoro, ein zakuk la, ve'yesh lo sachar kamo ha'me'ir la'aretz, ve'ladarim kedat u'chalacha, ve'yushlam al yedei osko b'chokhmat haTorah, or nafsho, v'Hashem yitbarach yishmor raglav milechet, ואפילו בחוכמת הקבלה אשר חס האדם לא יכוון אל האמת, הנה תמסר שערות ראשו, אף על פי כן, כיוון שכוונת האדם בעוסקו בתורה לשם שמיים לא יחוש, אפילו יתאה לשעה קלה שמתברך יניחהו במעגלי צדק. Oh, I'm going to stop, maybe I'll translate what we said so far. This is a very, very important idea. Maybe this is also another distinction between Chokhmah Yivanit and Chokhmah Yehudit. We have a concept in Halacha of Eilu ve'Eilu Divrei Elokim Chaim. These and these are the words of the living God. So let's say there is a machloket, right? Let's say there's a machloket between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. And they fight it out. Beit Hillel says this and brings proofs, and then Beit Shammai and brings his proofs, rationale here, rationale there, and there. And then in the end, the rabbis decide the halacha follows the position of Beit Hillel. And that's often the case. Once you say the halacha is according to the position of Beit Hillel, do we say, oh no, poor Beit Shammai, I've just wasted 6 months. I've spent 6 months trying to defend a position, then it turns out that's not the truth. We follow the position of Beit Hillel. So what do we say about all the months and months that I was learning on the other side of the argument? You follow? So in Halacha, there's a very, very important concept of Eilu ve'Eilu Divrei Elokim Chaim. These and these are the words of the living God. meaning Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai, the one that we follow and the one that we don't follow, are all the words of the living God. Now, how can they all be the words of the living God? Because anyone who is involved in the Torah conversation is connecting with the divine. It doesn't matter if in the end the halakha follows this position or the halakha follows that position. Any involvement in the halachic discussion is connecting to the divine. And therefore it doesn't matter if in the end the halakha follows this position, or if in the end the halakha follows that position. Anyone who's in that conversation is part of the conversation connecting to the divine. You follow? Now, you could rationalize it. I don't know if we need to rationalize, but you could rationalize it and to say that in order for A, to refine his position, sometimes you need B to argue against him. You know what I mean? Lahavdil, if there's a football team. So in order, there's football team A and football team B. So if you have football team A from the Premier League playing a football team from the 5th division, so the team from the Premier League is going to win, but it's not going to be a very exciting game. But if you have a game between a team in the Premier League, another one, and they clash, so then you can have some fantastic football going on. Why? Because each side brings out the best in the other. Lahavdil elef havdalot is the same in halachic argument. So when you have Beit Hillel, when you have a Beit Shammai, that allows Beit Hillel to refine his position. So you could rationalize it and say, Eilu va'elu divrei Elokim chaim, because you're all part of the journey to get you to the halakha. But I think the Bnei Yissaschar is saying more than that. Even without that, my involvement in Torah is connecting with the divine. I'm connecting to Ritzon Hashem. And it doesn't matter if my particular position turns out to be halakha l'maaseh, or if it's not halakha l'maaseh. The fact that I'm part of the conversation is a very, very important thing. You follow? Is that clear to everybody? So according to the Bnei Yissaschar, this idea of kavta ein zakuk la, that if it went out, it doesn't matter, because all you need to do is to light. Meaning, you just need to be there in the conversation. You just need to be there. It doesn't matter if you study and then it turns out that your idea is the best question in the room. Or it doesn't matter if you were in the room and it was the worst question. The fact is, you were in the room. That's the important point. You follow? And therefore, you just need to be there. The result isn't important. What's important is that you're in the room. You hear that? Kafta ein zakuk la. What the rabbis are telling us is that you just need to be part of the conversation. I remember many, many years ago, and I have to say, I feel this every single time I have the honor of walking into the Beit Midrash in Machon Meir. Many, many years ago, I was in yeshiva, and there were boys that were beginning their life in Torah study. And there were rabbis in the Beit Midrash that would strongly emphasize the students, to spend time just to sit in the Beit Midrash. Just being in the Beit Midrash, even if you're reading your own book, just that environment means I'm in the room, I'm in the sugya. Even if I read a book and then after half an hour I realize this isn't my style, and then you get another book, that wasn't a wasted half an hour, because it was a half an hour that I was in the sugya, I was in the room, I was part of the conversation. If somebody were to take a picture and say, who's in the room, who's connected, who's in the Beit Midrash right now, you were there, and that's all that matters. You follow? It's not about the results, it's not about getting 100, it's not about being the top, it's just about being in the room. Atem shomim et zeh? And therefore, kavta ein zakuk la. You could say it's all about the process and it's not about the result. I need to be there in the process. I want to be in the room where they're learning Torah. You follow? Does that make sense to you? And kavta ein zakuk la is a a way of explaining this concept. I want to go now to the second paragraph. Nira li says, de. בעבור זה, אחר שליטת מלכות יוון, נתרבו המחלוקת ופלוגתות בהלכות עד שנתחברו סדרי המשניות בפלוגות וכן התלמוד בפלוגות ומשא ומתן. See, this is just absolutely brilliant. מאת השם הייתה זאת להורות מה בין חוכמת התורה לחוכמת החיצוניות ופילוסופיה היוונית. Now this is absolutely brilliant. Do you know what happens immediately after Hanukkah? Like in Jewish history, do you know what started happening? Machloket. You have the Mishnah and the Gemara. You know, the story of Hanukkah happened just after the time of the Nevi'im. You know, it was in the middle of the Second Temple period, so the beginning of the Second Temple were Nevi'im. Nevi'im, they would tell us what to do. And then the end of the Second Temple period was the beginning of the Mishnah. That's Beit Hillel says this, Beit Shammai says that, Rabbi Kiva says this, Rabbi Shmuel says that, meaning the birth of Machloket that we engage in until today happened immediately after Hanukkah. The Talmud started immediately after Hanukkah. This ability to be part of the process, to focus on the argument rather than on the result, to be in the process rather than the bottom line, that mode of Jewish learning began immediately after Hanukkah. Meaning, is the perfect contrast between the Greeks and the Jews. Within the Greek culture, it was about truth. It was about the result. You know, he's right, go for him. He's wrong, keep away from him. And then the Jewish tradition is, well, let's learn Rabbi Akiva, and let's also learn Rabbi Shmuel. Let's learn Beit Hillel. Let's also learn Beit Shammai. Let's learn Rabbi Yochanan, and let's learn Reish Lakish. Let's learn both sides. This idea of a machloket, to be part of the conversation, is the most important thing. To be part of the process, to be part of the discussion, is what solidifies my Jewish identity, as opposed to where I need the results. And what's the metaphor? What's the metaphor for this idea? Kafta ein zakuk la. You follow? It's about the process and it's not about the result. Let me just read right to them. It's really absolutely brilliant. Me'et Hashem haytazot. It seems to me, says the Bnei Yissaschar, that this was intended by God, lehorot, in order to show us ma bein chokhmat haTorah lechokhmat hachitzoniot philosophia hayevanit. ShahaTorah kol hahoge ba, anyone who involves himself in Torah, v'osek ba, and is, deals with Torah, afilu lo kiven el halacha, even if you get it wrong, yirtzah yeratzeh lefnei Hashem, he is wanted in front of God. Ma she'ein ken b'sharei hachokhmot, that which is not the case in all the other chokhmot. It doesn't matter if you're right or you're wrong. It only matters that you're part of the conversation. And where do we learn that? We learn that in Hanukkah. When did the Jewish tradition of chokhmah, of machloket, of the elu va'elu, this one says this and that one says that, when did that all start? It all started on Hanukkah, to contrast the world of the Greeks with the world of the Jews. And what's the symbol of this idea? Kavta ein zakuk la. It's about the process and not about the result. Okay, sweet people, Joy, I want to summarize very, very briefly. We saw a very interesting halakha. The halakha that we saw is that if your Hanukkah lights go out, there's no requirement in halakha to relight them. You're welcome to, but there's no requirement to. And we pondered why that is the case. If our Shabbos candles went out, for technical reasons you can't relight them because it's Shabbat. But in general, you would, if you're in the middle of performing a mitzvah and then something goes wrong, you would fix it immediately. You wouldn't say, well, I've done my bit and then it's not my fault that it's gone out. you're about to give money to tzedakah and then you drop the money, you wouldn't say, oh, never mind, I'll just put it in my pocket. You would go and put it in a tzedakah box. You wouldn't. Half a mitzvah isn't the same as a whole mitzvah. But here, you do half a mitzvah. You just light it, it blows out, that's fine. Why? And we gave two reasons. The first reason was from Rav Shmuel Bornstein of Sokachov, in order to emphasize the idea of an action. That for us Jews, what distinguishes us from animals is the way we behave. A refined human being, for us, is refined in the way they eat, in the way they walk, in the way they interact with other people. What makes us into a dignified person is our actions. And therefore, the mitzvah is purely an action. I want to distinguish our approach to the world of Greek philosophy, where the greatest person for them is the greatest mind. For us, the greatest person is the person who acts in the most appropriate manner, the most dignified manner. How do I emphasize the value of action over the value of thought? By making the mitzvah of Hanukkah just about the action. Do the action and then you've done everything you need to do. That is the position of the Shem Shmuel. After the Shem Shmuel, we looked at the Bnei Sascha, and he said, why is the focus on lighting, and even if it goes out afterwards? In order to explain that the focus is on the process and not on the result. The most important thing is to be part of the conversation. The most important thing is to identify, to be part of the community. Even if there are moments that I, read the wrong book or give the wrong answer or made a fool of myself, didn't do this, it doesn't matter. What God is interested in is somebody who identifies. It's not about the results. It doesn't matter. There are no grades. It's about the process. Are you in the sugya? Are you sitting in the Beit Midrash? Are you part of the Jewish community? As long as I'm in the process, as long as I'm there, even if I make mistakes, as long as I'm there, then I'm good. And in order to emphasize it, it's about the process rather than the result. I do the process. I like whether it's lit or not is really not up to me. The focus is on doing the right process. Lighting it is all I need to do. And if afterwards the result is it goes out, that's of far less significance. Those are the words of the Bnei Sascha. And then he adds a really brilliant little twist. And he notices that there was a huge revolution that we are experiencing until today after Hanukkah, and that's the birth of a machloket. This ability to see these and these are the words of the living God, to see both sides of the argument as part of the words of the living God, that ability to see both sides is something that we learnt immediately after the Hanukkah story. Immediately after Hanukkah, we come to the Mishnah, the compiling of the Mishnah, and from the Mishnah to the Gemara, which is really the book of Jewish argument that all started immediately after Hanukkah to show this about the process rather than the result. Yishal koach to all of you. Tizku mitzvot. Hanukkah sameach. Does anyone have any